Good morning to you all. My name is Professor Roger O'Sullivan, and on behalf of the Institute of Public Health, I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar today entitled Get Active for Better Aging, How to Encourage and Support Physical Activity in Older Adults. The role of the Institute of Public Health is to help inform public policy and support healthier populations in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Today's event is part of our programme of work in the area of physical activity and ageing. This is actually our 5th annual event on this topic. The evidence is clear. Physical activity plays an important role in our health and well-being as we age, including in older age. But this aspect is often forgotten about. The message is simple. We need to move more. However, the challenge is to actually do it. We need to address the barriers that prevent us from moving more and support those interventions that encourage us at the individual, community, and societal level. Today, we will focus on public health and behaviour change and how to encourage and support older people to be physically active. The goal as we age is to retain our physical and cognitive function and delay the onset of illness and poor health. A major challenge for public health is typically physical activity levels decline as we age, but this doesn't need to be the case. The interest in this topic and the importance of this area of work for individuals and society as a whole is reflected by the fact that 500 plus people registered for this webinar. Thank you for being part of the convoy in the area of physical activity and ageing. The format of the event is that there will be 3 research presentations. Professor Ryan Rhodes from the University of Victoria in Canada, Professor Mark Tully from Ulster University, Professor Suzanne McDonough from the Royal Colleges of Surgeons in Ireland. Then we will launch a new Public Health Matters digital module to help support healthcare professionals and anyone interested in supporting older people to have more physically active lives. We will also have a chaired Q&A session on the issue of behaviour change. And then Thomas McCabe will also, earlier in the programme, have an energizer with us, and we will also have a number of polls. This is a jam-packed event, and can I ask you to submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Then my colleague Toby will pass them to me and I will ask the panel. I hope you find this event enjoyable, informative, active and interactive. Please feel free to tweet about this event. Before we go to our first speaker, we're going to have a poll now. Okay, so how many minutes of moderate intensity physical activity are older adults recommended to engage in on a weekly basis? So let's see what you vote. So at this stage, we have about 11% clicking 60 minutes. We have 10% clicking 90. We have 18% clicking 120. And we have 56% clicking 150 plus and just 5% clicking don't know. So the answer to that question is 150 plus minutes. But actually, these are the type of issues that you'll cover in the module or the learning pathway that's going to be launched today. So Adam, if you want to close that poll, and thank you for everybody for taking part. We're now going to move over to Professor Ryan Rhodes, who's going to talk about behaviour change at an individual level in relation to physical activity. So thank you very much.
Well, hello everybody, and thanks for attending this webinar. My name's Ryan Rhodes, and I'm a professor of health psychology at the University of Victoria in Victoria, Canada. Today I'm going to chat about physical activity in older adults, and particularly from an individual level standpoint. I'm going to talk about why people do what they do in terms of physical activity, as well as how we might be able to promote more physical activity. Before I begin, I just want to outline what I'm going to chat about today. I'll start with a bit of an introduction of what I do and the Behavioral Medicine Lab at the University of Victoria. And then I'll move to sort of the rationale for why physical activity is so important for older adults, both in terms of its benefits and the inactivity issues right now with physical activity and health. I'll then move to what we know so far about individual factors with older adult physical activity from a review of observational, qualitative, and intervention research. And then moving forward in future directions, some of the areas that we're focusing on in health psychology to improve our interventions. Okay, so I'm over in Victoria, Canada, which is on the far west coast on Vancouver Island. As you can see, it's a relatively mid-sized city, and our university has about 25,000 students. I started the behavioral medicine lab, which I'm the director, about 25 years ago. It started where I was pretty much had one trainee in an office with a file desk. And now we have anywhere between 15 or 20 different staff working on behavioral science projects. Most of our research is on physical activity and physical activity promotion, but we also do work in various other movement behaviors such as sedentary behavior and sleep. And sometimes we've done some work in healthy eating. Our research is actually quite varied. I do quite a bit of work in health psychology, with various populations. And I would say that probably the best way to understand my work is I'm interested in people in transition. And so some of our work is on sort of the great transition out of high school to university. Much of our work is sort of on the new parent experience, both from a perspective of the change in lifestyle for parents, as well as helping kids foster healthy behavior change. But I also have interests in early career all the way up the age spectrum into sort of empty nesters, so when the children leave, as well as that transition to retirement and through aging. Now, what brings all this research together is the psychological models we use and the approaches to help understand people who are changing behavior in transition or trying to maintain behavior during transitions. And so we use a model that looks at various factors that have to do with behavior change, as you can kind of see in this pyramid. And I'm going to go over that as we move through today a little bit in terms of some of the advances we're making with understanding why people change behaviors and how to help people stick to behavior change. All right, so physical activity in older adults, what's the big deal? Well, in case you've been living in a cave in the last sort of 30 years, physical activity is very good for your health. What most people don't know is just how important it is and how vast the sheer benefits are. So physical inactivity at this point is linked to at least 35 chronic conditions. As you can see in this slide, they span from all types of metabolic and cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, some cancers and pulmonary diseases, but also psychological disorders and well-being. Honestly, if you could wrap up all these benefits into a pill, physical activity would be the most prescribed medication on the planet. I mean, it's not just the breadth of these benefits, depth and magnitude of the benefits that I think is really important when we look at physical activity. So typically with most of our major chronic diseases, physical activity at sort of public health guideline levels, which is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week for adults, reduces these chronic diseases around the 30 or 40% risk reduction level. So that's a particularly powerful dose for a relatively small amount of physical activity in terms of the amount of hours in the day and across the week. So a very powerful behavior, and certainly comparable to some of our other major factors like smoking and unhealthy eating. There are some benefits to physical activity that are specific to older adults. So in this literature, it's very common to see the social benefits of physical activity come to the forefront. This is in comparison to, say, middle-aged adults and younger adults who are just trying to sometimes sneak physical activity in with their very busy schedules. So social is something that comes up. Certainly the functional and physical benefits come to the forefront as well. I think it's important to understand with older adults that most physical activities are safe, and even lower intensity physical activities, even slightly below guidelines, have been shown to decrease the risks of strokes, falls, and there's an effect of physical activity on protecting against cognitive decline that this area of research is ever burgeoning at this point to understand more and more. Of course, with all those benefits, one would think that we're all physically active, but I'm sure we all know that that's not the case. And really, the more interesting question is how many people are active versus inactive. There have been several recent estimates sort of worldwide to suggest that about 30% of the world's adult population are not meeting physical activity guidelines. But in high income nations, that is almost double that. And I think that those kind of general assessments are not really as sort of conducive to the bigger picture. And so this sort of breakdown, this is Canadian physical activity levels. The data is a little bit older, but really it hasn't changed much. Our physical activity levels haven't changed too much since 2000 until we get to sort of the COVID pandemic, which I'll chat about in a moment. And you can see here that there are a couple of other important points around physical activity prevalence that are worth understanding. One is that there is a difference between men and women with physical activity. As you can see, it's quite prominent. It sits around between 7 and 10% difference in prevalence, with men more active than women. And the other is that there is a generalized sort of downward spiral of physical inactivity as we get older. And meaning that older populations are typically the most physically inactive across all different groups. So this means that it's particularly important to understand physical activity promotion for older adults, given all the benefits, yet the generally low prevalence. Now, there have been some unfortunate issues around the COVID pandemic restrictions and physical activity during this time. This is some results we had from Canada in the first few months, actually, of COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. And what you can see here with this graph is kind of a breakdown of how people responded to physical activity during that time. So on the far left are kind of the people who were inactive before COVID and continued being inactive. And on the far right, these are kind of the ever active group. This is the group that was active before and continued to be active. But it's this sort of middle three groups that are particularly interesting, I think, during the COVID-19 issues and restrictions. So you can see here that there was this group on the right here called Breach and Repair, and they're kind of a success story. They're people who traditionally, I think, were going to gyms and recreation centers, and when these closed, there was a brief moment where they were physically inactive, but they found physical activity again. And this group tends to be associated with people who found home exercise or Zoom lessons over exercise or started walking more. There's a very small number of people who were adopters. They were physically inactive before COVID-19 restrictions and then started to become more active. This group tends to be associated with parents. I think their kids were in the house, and obviously there was a lot of school closures, and so you had to get out and do something with your kids, and so it was kind of an unintended positive byproduct at that point. But unfortunately, the largest group is this group called, unsuccessful transitioners, and this is a group who were physically active at guidelines before COVID-19, but have actually dropped. And again, this was during the first few months of COVID-19, but 2 years later, in Canada using sort of the same sampling, and you can see here that it's sort of the same profile. So we've got a group who are consistently inactive, the group on the right who are consistently active. We've had a small group who increased, but 2 years later we still have over double the group who increased is the group who decreased. So the take home here is that the prevalence of physical activity was not very high before the COVID pandemic, and it's become even more of a crisis since. So this leads us to, what can we do about it? Who are active, who are inactive, and how have our attempts at promotion been going? So, to answer a question like this would basically I teach a course in this across 3 months. And it's ultimately socio-ecologically in scope. So there's lots of various ways you could look at why people are physically active and inactive. And this graph is meant to show the sheer vastness of how you could look at attempts to promote physical activity, all the way from global economics to the sort of the regional aspects and policy, to the built environment, social environment, and various natural environment, down to genetics. I'm going to talk about more of the psychological and a little bit of the interpersonal today, because that's where my research focuses, but this is intended to suggest that that's by no means the whole picture. It's just the picture of what we're doing in the area of health psychology to help with physical inactivity. And so to provide sort of an overview of what we know so far, engaged in a search of systematic reviews and reviews on this topic since 2008, and have summarized these and coded and themed them with a research assistant to kind of give a broad overview of what we know so far. You'll see here, and I do want to point out that it's hard to conceptualize exactly what meets the criteria of older adults, so we let the reviews meet that. Now, most of these reviews are age 65 and older, but there are some that sort of move back into sort of the 50, 55 plus range. We found 35 reviews that met this inclusion criteria. You can see here a nice mix of sort of observational designs, which is just assessing what people are doing in samples, to experimental behavior change interventions where we've tried to change behavior, and also qualitative feedback where we have more in-depth structured interviews and focus groups among older adults to understand physical activity. In terms of the observational studies, you can see that there is a definite trend in what we found in terms of associations. So when you kind of look down this list, what I see is that a lot of the socio-demographic factors don't have strong associations with meeting physical activity guidelines and physical activity. What we see is almost overwhelming support for the role of health, when in various ways, whether it's objective health, self-reported health, mental health, and effects such as that, and then also with motivation, so factors like self-efficacy, intention, kick-out, as well as social support, and some mixed results for the built environment. Now, this is at the individual level, so this is perceptions of the environment, not necessarily the actually objective built environment. Now, one of the reasons that the socio-demographic factors start to perhaps fall out in these reviews is because it's a truncated sample. This is when we're just looking at older adults. But that's interesting to note because it suggests that those are not great markers of necessarily who's active and inactive. In terms of the qualitative themes, what we have here is a series of benefits and barriers that are probably not all that surprising, but again, some of the same types of factors are coming through. So these would be, the health benefits, enjoyment and pleasure, and two of sort of the social benefits with both social and interaction and belonging. A lot of these barriers are probably known to everyone here, and I'm sure everyone's heard of these, from weather to, again, health barriers, lack of interest, which is more of a motivational issue, some aspects raised around the environment, and structural barriers and safety. So a little bit more of sort of the rich themes come out when you actually ask people in qualitative interviews of what's going on that are slightly different from some of the more observational research. One of the things that we found in a review that I think is quite interesting is looking at the difference between kind of the middle-aged, upper middle-aged adult and older adults. And what we found that I think is quite interesting is that most of the barriers are similar, many of the same factors, but ultimately middle-aged adults identified self-regulation as a sort of a critical struggle that they had beyond older adults. And this is probably not surprising if you think about it. Sort of that middle-aged adult time is when often you're dealing with kids, you're looking at maybe aging parents, you're dealing with work-related, occupational-related factors, and so time management, self-regulation becomes a massive issue around trying to find time for physical activity, where older adults, this comes up as less so. It's more around interest than time. So that's an interesting factor, and it shapes what we might do for promotion psychology. So less on self-regulation and sort of goal setting than perhaps if we were working with middle-aged populations. And in terms of interventions, what we have here is 7 studies that looked at, 7 reviews that looked at whether interventions have been successful or not. And we found an effect size of 0.26. So those who are not into statistics, what this means is ultimately about a third of a standard deviation change from where they were at baseline. I think better ways to look at this is how many steps per day. So on average, these interventions have been able to improve at about 400 steps per day and about 13 to 14 sort of additional minutes of moderate vigorous physical activity per day. So that's pretty decent, but as you could imagine, it's not or anything. It's relatively modest. A couple of the issues with the interventions that we found that's important to point out would be that they were more effective in the short term than the long term. So not a lot of evidence for real long-term changes. We also didn't see any clear evidence for what particular technique, what setting, what medium of delivery, for example, is superior to anything. We did find some evidence that supervised exercise programs were superior to, say, home-based, but these aren't huge effects. So I think that suggests that there's loads of different ways in which one can intervene, and there's no one particular method that's coming out as superior to the other. Now, this kind of leads to potential future directions and areas we could go to learn more in terms of health psychology. And that's where my lab has really taken this. Talk about a few of these today. I'm going to talk about 3 before we end today. And one of the things to think about when we're looking at future directions is, can we expand from the approaches of previous theoretical paradigms? Now, what the major theoretical paradigm that's been going on in health and exercise psychology for about 30 or 40 years has been sort of the cognitive or social cognitive paradigm. And this is very much a rationalist paradigm. It assumes that people engage in behaviors because of their benefits and engage in kind of a cost-risk assessment, even if it's a fast assessment. They'll engage in behaviors if they feel that they're capable. And from here, we form intentions, and then we act on our intentions. And so even when you see some of the previous, or saw some of the previous results that I presented, you can see much of it is sort of benefits and barriers. It's a very rationalist approach to understanding physical activity. This has been useful, as I pointed out. There's some apparent issues with this. And one of the first is the well-known kind of intention behavior gap. So anyone who's tried to change their behavior during New Year's resolutions is probably well aware of this, that often we give up on these very quickly. My lab has engaged in some reviews and meta-analyses and experimental designs on this to show that this is a pretty robust phenomenon. As you can see here, we've got experimental data on the left that suggests that you have to have a pretty massive change in intention to even get a small change in behavior. So there's sort of dose response is not one-to-one. Perhaps a better way of looking at this is in observational research. And so this is the figure on the right here, where you're looking at a 2x2 intend to and don't intend to engage in physical activity versus whether or not you engaged in physical activity or not. And you can see the rational metric would be sort of the top left. Those are the non-intenders who successfully don't engage in physical activity. Down below, you have the successful intenders. These are the people who intended to be active and were. But you can see the other 2 quadrants tell an interesting story. So one is that it appears that intention is necessary, because there's almost no one who doesn't intend to engage in physical activity and is regularly active. That's probably measurement error, that 2%. I'd love to know who those people are, but ultimately it's always a very small group. But we have a relatively large group of people who intended to engage in physical activity but didn't. And again, this is kind of this New Year's resolutions that don't get fulfilled. And the rationalist approach doesn't have a lot of explanation for why this is happening. So we've embarked on trying to understand what predicts the intention behavior gap. And there's at least 3 major factors that I'm just going to run through for the end of the talk here. So number 1 is that the rationalist approach considers enjoyment. You saw it in some of the qualitative component around the review, but ultimately doesn't consider how people feel all that much. It's much more about the benefits we get from something and whether we can do it or not. However, we found in exercise psychology and many areas of health behavior research that how people feel about a behavior in the moment, during the experience, is going to designate whether they come back to that behavior, and we often don't put enough consideration on this. So we had a review and meta-analysis actually that showed that the affect experience during physical activity was a far better predictor than the affect that you experience after. So all those people who say, wow, what a great workout, that was a really good use of my time, unfortunately that's not a very good predictor of whether they come back. It's how they felt during. So from a clinical perspective, this really emphasizes the importance of feeling states during physical activity being incredibly important. And sometimes this walks right around intentions. So people make plans, but they find ways out of those plans if ultimately the experience was not enjoyable. People do not like to repeat unpleasant experiences. We've also found this in reviews where we look at the intention-behavior gap. As you can see here, the reasons for intention to engage in something like physical activity is often a mixture of those affective reasons and the benefits for health and well-being. But the only thing that actually predicts whether someone translates an intention into behavior is the affective domain. The other two factors are around building reflexes for physical activity. So things that aren't as much about sort of the rationalist perspective and self-regulation, but more reflexive, ways in which we can actually engage in a behavior that's triggered more by cues and circumstances. Now, habit is kind of a word that gets thrown around quite a bit. Anecdotally, sometimes it's used as just sort of a word to express patterns of behavior. But habit in psychology is a construct that's a precursor to behavior. It's a determinant of behavior and not the behavior itself. And we've shown that habit is a very strong predictor of physical activity that can predict both the intention-behavior gap, as well as sometimes predict behavior completely independent of intention. It's important to understand the premise of how habits are formed in order to look at how we might be able to assist people in forming habits. So the theory behind habit formation is that ultimately it is a goal-directed behavior at first. So we form intentions, perhaps based on the benefits of physical activity, and start engaging in a behavior. And over time, that repeated contextual pairing with cues in the environment or cues around when we're performing the behavior start to shape this impulse to perform the behavior. And after a while, it's the cues themselves and not necessarily the motivation that starts promoting the behavior. So it starts to become less conscious, less something we have to self-regulate, less work, and something that just feels right. It feels like this is the right thing to do at the time. We've shown in our research that we can change habit. This is one of the first studies that I'm showing here in this slide that actually looked at whether we can intervene on habit. And so the habit group was a group that was focused only on ultimately finding a pattern of behavior with consistency and developing cues, where the education group was much more that rationalist approach about the benefits of physical activity and building physical activity capability. And we found that the habit formation group was much more reliable and performed more physical activity over 8 weeks. And again, the important point here is that none of the intervention for the habit group was on why to do physical activity, and it was all on how to practice physical activity. This might be really important to consider habits with older adults because habit it really forms at a time when there's discontinuity, when there's change. And so it's an opportunity to actually start moving toward a new behavior where old habits are starting to shift. And so this is a time when, from an intervention perspective, that we might be able to have an impact. The last construct I wanted to raise was that of identity. Identity is best sort of considered shifting from someone who says, I do exercise or physical activity, to someone who says, I am an exerciser or I am a physically active person. So there's sort of a sense of ownership, a personal standard of behavior, and that shift can be very important to how behavior manifests. Identity, again, like habit, has a very strong relationship with physical activity, independent of that rationalist approach, and tends to be the most reliable moderator of the intention-behavior relationship. In fact, we have a recent review where we looked at over 100 different potential interacting factors with the intention-behavior relationship, and identity was the most reliable. Happening with identity, how does it affect behavior? Well, once someone sort of adopts this personal standard of behavior, we like to stick to what we believe in. And so what happens is any form of dissonance that's triggered from the environment or socially or comparatively creates that sort of negative affect around that difference between our standard and what our behavior is, and it motivates us to reduce the discrepancy. So if we think we're an exerciser and something's interfering with our exercise, this engages an affective system that says we don't feel comfortable with this, we don't like this dissonance, and we're highly motivated to sustain the identity standard. So these are seen as self-regulating systems, and very different than kind of the rationalist approach where there's benefit, because you can actually have an identity about something that has nothing to do with its benefits. It can sometimes be actually something that's not beneficial at all, but you're highly regulated to try to stick to that identity. And so having a physical activity identity is potentially a very important way of motivating this sustained behavior change. From an older adult perspective, just like habit, there may be a time that it may be a very important time where we can actually shift identities, because physical activity can help regain feelings of purpose and being in a collective group, or creating routines and structures that are sort of changing as we leave the workforce or as we shift into a different phase in life. So just to finish, there's a few clinical implications in terms of habit formation and identity that would be important. I would suggest that if you're interested in promoting habit, time of day is an excellent cue, because it's there at one moment and gone the next. So if you can actually associate physical activity with, say, something in the morning or something in the afternoon or after dinner, that could be very effective. Tagging it to other habits could be very useful. So if someone has their morning coffee and then wants to go on a walk, that's sort of a nice way of tagging to create a new habit. In terms of identity formation, it involves a shift of a mindset. So getting someone to think about all the things they value and putting everything out on the table, so to speak, and then figuring out where physical activity sits in that array of interests and values can be a very important way of rebuilding one's behaviors and what they prioritize. Visual displays of the behaviors, such as having a photo with someone walking, being active, can help remind people of that identity, as well as sort of verbal self-affirmation. Okay, well, to conclude, what we found in our review was that sociodemographics, once in the older adult population, was not as important as health matters and motivational matters. Individual factors were certainly important, and interventions that have tried to approach this mainly from a rationalist approach of promoting the benefits of physical activity and building capability have been effective, but there's certainly room for improvement, and we don't have a great understanding yet of why these are perfectly effective. And then I focused at the end on frameworks and target constructs that may be particularly important beyond this sort of rationalist social cognitive approach that you may want to consider in physical activity promotion with older adults. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you have a good rest of the webinar and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Professor Rhodes. That was an excellent presentation. So much to discuss on the panel, issues around time management. Before we move on to our next speaker, we're going to have another poll. A knowledge question again. Could you explain to an older person with examples the difference between moderate and vigorous physical activity? So it's really positive. We have over 80% of people indicating they can. We have just under 10% people saying no, and 7% people indicating they don't know. The good answer to this question is that actually in the learning pathway, you'll get a chance to look at various examples and how to assess the difference between moderate and vigorous physical activity. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. So I'm delighted now to welcome Professor Mark Tully from Ulster University, and he's going to talk about the Walk With Me program. So Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Roger, and always nice to follow Ryan, who eloquently lays out some of the theoretical underpinning for a lot of the advances in this field over the last couple of years. So I've been asked to give you a sort of an update and an overview of the Walk With Me study. First of all, to say thank you to the funders. They usually finish with that, but always worth acknowledging the NIHR and HSCR&D who funded this long program of work around engaging inactive older adults in regular physical activity. So you'll know the guidelines probably quite well, but what we've seen is a shift in the guidelines towards a message around moving more and sitting less often. And with that in mind, we've been thinking about over the last number of years the mechanisms to activate older adults into some regular activity and then support them in maintaining their activity. And that's a lot of what Ryan has been covering. What's interesting, I put some of these slides together before I saw Ryan's presentation, but along the same kind of lines, most people now know the extensive health benefits of physical activity. And yet, despite that, very few of us are regularly active. So in a European study that we conducted, older adults across Europe spend about 77% of their time sitting, and about over half were inactive according to the guidelines. So that poses a challenge as to how we support activity as we go older. Some of that is explained by Ryan and others' work around the intention behavior gap. Knowing what we should do isn't the same as actually doing it. And addressing some of those deficits in the support mechanisms that we provide are probably the next area of research in behavioral research in activity in older adults. So I was struck by this piece of meta-ethnography, which really describes the views of older adults of what being physically active means. And not surprising, some of it is related to the health benefits of activity, but most aren't. At the bottom right, there's a large section around the enjoyment of activity, the sense of doing activity with other people. In the middle at the bottom is the identity of being active, the purpose that activity brings in the bottom left. And most of those kinds of factors we don't design into our regular activity programs. Ryan mentioned the importance of positive affect, and thinking about why people don't enjoy exercise is another aspect of redesigning our interventions. The feelings, the emotions of doing the activity, as Ryan mentioned, are really important. But I'd probably bring one further tool to the table, particularly around the work we've done in older adults, which is that the views of previous physical activity, historical physical activity you've done a long time ago, influence your views and emotions that you feel about physical activity now. And so a lot of the older adults that we work with will refer back to activity they've tried in the past and it perhaps not been enjoyable and not wanting to revisit that again. As Ryan said, you wouldn't really want to go back and do something that's not that enjoyable. So we started to think then about the broader constructs that influence activity. And what we know is that the types of interventions that seem to be more effective are those that tackle more than just the individual psychological or biological factors relating to activity. And so we need to start to think about how we influence the social environment and indeed make better use of the physical environment around us. And with that in mind, we started this in 2012, work around peer-led walking interventions. And I'm going to show you little bits of snippets of the intervention development work. It was co-produced with older adults, included a rapid review of behavior change techniques used in previous interventions, semi-structured interviews with older adults, and really talking to them about what they'd prefer to see in a program, and then testing the feasibility of that. And when we started to talk about activity, we took the rationalist approach, as Ryan referred to it, in terms of social cognitive theory as the starting point. So intentions, whilst they aren't sufficient for activity change, they are necessary for physical activity change. And goal setting and self-monitoring can certainly help form those intentions. And in the older adults that we talked to about designing the program, there was some concern about not setting goals that were going to be too hard to achieve or too much pressure on those goals. And also the notion that it might be a good program for people who are who need some encouragement and some support, say like those living alone was one of the factors that people identified. So goal setting had its place, although we shouldn't over-egg it, but it's a very useful tool to get people moving. When we started to talk about changing the social environment, so that's changing the people that they're interacting with, the role models they have through a peer mentor, um, somebody who uh, uh, would be like them, maybe from the same community, but active already to take them through the intervention. Some of the key considerations we identified was that the process needs to be well planned. The older adults would like to try new experiences with these people. It should be able to identify the benefits from it, but really it should be focusing slightly more probably on sharing interests and being enjoyable. And the kinds of people that they'd like to walk with in our study design was uh, peer mentors that were somewhat like them, had some level of training, but would be loyal, and they had a preference for volunteers as opposed to someone whose job it was to do it. So we started to build up a picture then of the potential of using lay trained peer mentors to deliver the intervention. And this is in the context of a move towards social prescribing right across the UK, and whether or not we could embed this type of program within the existing system. So our thoughts were that a peer-led walking intervention might be a really good way of activating the inactive older adult, but that someone would need to point them in that direction to join the program, and then the program itself would point them towards the other plethora of activity opportunities there are in the community. And so there's been a huge amount of interest in social prescribing particularly in the UK. And when we talked to the some of the people, participants around what would facilitate recruiting them from general practice, so what would get them from the GP practice sort of to the peer mentor program, we noticed a number of really interesting things to pull out. So part of it were that there are barriers in practices. Practices we know are extremely busy, so workload and time are difficult, and it might be difficult to identify the appropriate participant or person to invite. But that if we could identify what the benefits were to the practice and to the GP and to the patient, in other words, if we were able to elicit the particular health benefits in terms of either managing or preventing disease, then the practice would see the reasons for taking part. And a number of mechanisms for that. It might be self-referral through the practice. It might be in-person recruitment at the practice, so there'd be someone in the practice recruiting. We usually target particularly older adults at this time of year with flu vaccines. So it could be that there's certain times of years that we could tag in the invite to these kinds of programs with other invites. And really the ongoing engagement of the practice so that they can see the benefits of the program as it rolls out are important to that. So what we ended up with was a 12-week peer-led walking program in 3 phases, and these phases match pretty well what Ryan actually was talking about. So we rely heavily on social cognitive theory as a way of building capability and intentions in the early phases of the program. So the first phase of the 12-week program is around getting to know the peer uh, mentor, getting to know the program, and really starting to explore a new sort of social environment for the individual. They go through a process of goal setting, which includes both step goal setting as an intermediate outcome towards more broader functional goal setting for things that they might like to do. And then they begin to repeat that behavior in the local neighborhoods using the cues of either the environment or day-to-day routine to develop those habits. And with the support of the peer mentor, the end of the program is around exploring opportunities in the community that they might continue that activity. That might be informal exercise groups or walking groups or such like, or informal developing that sort of routine and habit, and really focusing more on that sort of identity development. So in this uh, first phase, which was a feasibility stage to show was it feasible both to deliver the intervention and indeed to assess its outcomes, which has been published in the NIHR journal. What we showed was really high levels of retention and compliance with the program, and moderate changes in activity. Similar order to what Ryan has showed in his previous reviews, but those are clinically significant changes of about 10 minutes of moderate and vigorous physical activity per day. So that's an additional 70 minutes of activity per week. And that level of change is associated with a number of cardiovascular and metabolic outcomes. When we started to discuss this with the participants, there were a number of key themes that came out around why a peer-led program might be suitable for certainly this target group. The social support received from the peer mentors was one of the sort of main features, and it was a two-way process, as the first participant highlighted. So they're both getting something from that interaction, but they're giving something to it. So they feel like they've got there's some purpose in there, and there's some enjoyment in there too, which is the second quote. Just talking to people, sometimes we refer to this as meeting new people and trying new things. And that sort of added aspects to life seemed to really resonate with some of the participants. And that was elicited in when we started to talk about what the benefits were, which were not just the health benefits that were referred to, but also the sense of increased capability, increased walking, the sense of increased enjoyment, and the psychological benefits, as well as the physical health benefits that come from that. So we're currently in a phase where we're conducting a fully powered cost effectiveness study, which has just started, based in the north of Ireland, acknowledging the co-investigators on the study listed on the screen. And so what this will be a 12-week intervention following the same process as the feasibility study, with 6-month and 12-month follow-up, with 348 inactive 60-plus-year-olds living in disadvantaged areas in Northern Ireland. This is a busy slide, but what we really want to do is to start to unpick some of those factors that lead to activity maintenance across a longer period of time in detail, really getting under the hood of this. So we know what our theoretical underpinning of it is, and what we want to do is to see what happens both during the program in terms of the activation, the habit formation, and the further maintenance. And we've got measures in around those, but also what happens, what mediates those changes, both the activities that the individual undertakes and the broader sort of social influences on those as well. To finish with, I really like this slide from an Australian study, which was a walking program in older adults, and I think it challenges maybe our concepts around health promotion, because the walking program, as the participants identified, was that they joined the program primarily as a relief from isolation. It wasn't particularly targeting socially isolated individuals, but there may be reasons for starting these programs that aren't pure physical health benefits. And so we need to start to think about how we describe and market our programs. And maintenance in this case was through the friendships that were developed or the social environment, which is aspects of both identity, social support, and a changed social environment in there. And so the things that kept them in the program were the people that they met. And I wonder how many of our programs are really taking account of these kinds of social factors in their design, either for recruitment or as part of the design. Just to acknowledge all of the partners in the research, of which it couldn't go on without, and to thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions in due course.
Thank you, Mark, for a great presentation. I was really struck by the point you made about the historical view of physical activity. Often when we think about physical activity, we think about it being a subject that you did at school. And that may be an historical view of physical activity among some people. And also you touched on at the very end that issue about the importance of the social connections and how important they are to us all as we learn through the pandemic. So now we're just going to shift pace. We're going to move over to Thomas McCabe, and Thomas is going to walk us through or talk us through some physical activity.
Yeah, thanks very much, Roger. Just to introduce myself, I'm Thomas McCabe. I'm the National Manager with Ciel-Blow Ireland. Roger, thanks very much for having us along today. In Ciel-Blow Ireland, we deliver physical activity programs to Ireland's older population, those living with chronic disease and physical or intellectual disabilities. Today in Ireland, we're proud and privileged to work with about 6,500 people a week in 21 counties around Ireland, both in person and online. The youngest people we work with are people in their early 20s with physical or intellectual disabilities. And the oldest person we work with right now is a 104-year-old nursing home resident in North County Dublin. All our staff come from a sports science and exercise physiology background, and we're delighted to do the work that we do. So Roger very kindly asked me to come along and do a quick energizer session with you. So I'll take you through the quick energizer session today, just to get the heart rate up. And the good news is it's primarily chair based, so and it shouldn't be too long either. So we're just going to get started, folks. So just for yourselves, check, can you see me okay? So sit up nice and tall in the chair, and just to get the heart rate going just a little bit, we're going to march the legs for 30 seconds. I'm going to start 3, 2, 1, and we're off. Getting marched. That's it. Getting that heart rate up. That's 10 seconds gone, 20 to go. Very good. Another 15. And last 10. Almost there. 3, 2, and 1. Right hand on the left shoulder, left hand on the right shoulder. Elbows up, chin up. Keep the back straight. And keep the elbows down to the knees and back up. Working that hinge at the hips. Up and down. Very good. Very good. 20 seconds gone. 10 to go. Almost done. 3, 2, and 1. Excellent stuff. So feet shoulder width apart, toes pointed outwards, and we're going to squat up and down. Okay, ready to go. 3, 2, and 1. And we're up. How many can you do in 30 seconds? That's 10 seconds gone. 15 to go. Last 10. 3, 2, and 1. Excellent stuff so far. Brilliant. Okay, next one. The one every group you work with loves. Fists up. Picture someone you don't like. Probably me at the moment. I'm pointing out with our left and our right. Ready to go. 3, 2, and 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Very good. 10 seconds gone. 10 seconds to go. Almost done. And 3, and 2, and 1. Excellent stuff. We're up around the chairs again. Okay. And next thing we're going to do, folks, is knee raises. Okay. Get them knees up as high as we can. Okay. Left and right. And we're ready to go. 3, 2, and 1. Get them knees up as high as we can. That's it. 10 seconds to go. Looks like 10 seconds gone. And last 10. 3, 2, and 1. Excellent stuff. Okay, let's get the fists like so. Okay, and we're flicking the hands out. 3, 2, 1, and we're off. Last few exercises coming up now, folks. 10 seconds to go. And should be getting tired right now. 3, 2, and 1. Fists up again. Or punch it straight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Okay, hands like so. Next thing I want you to do is give yourself a big round of applause. Well done. Okay, brilliant stuff, super stuff. And back over to you, Roger. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you so much. I'm super impressed. I had to get my breath back there before I started talking. You didn't cause you any trouble at all. So, Thomas, thank you very much for.
I was training hard for this, Roger.
I know you have. So, delighted to invite Susan McDonough, who will now make a presentation on the Worth study. So, Suzanne.
Thanks very much for inviting me, and it's been a really great opportunity to listen to both the speakers. Mark and I worked together already, but certainly the insight from Ryan will really help us as our Worth study is just finishing recruitment, data collection. So it's due to finish in December. So certainly go back and have a think again with that new lens in terms of what a data means. But what I wanted to talk to you in the next 20 minutes is how we have supported people with severe mental illness and associated cognitive deficits to engage in a behaviour change intervention. The protocol for the study is published for those who want to find out more detail about the study, but it was done both in North and South of Ireland and led by Ulster University in collaboration with other academic partners. So the plan for my talk is here, and I'm going to just talk about background. So why is this important? So just start with the definition. So people with SMI have psychological problems that are so debilitating that their ability to engage in functional or occupational activities is severely impaired. So in our study, we had people who were in residential settings, so may not have been employment, and also people who were able to hold down jobs and live in the community. So a broad range of people. But I think the big challenge with people with SMI is their physical health problems. And the whole reason for this study is my sister is a consultant psychiatrist, and we'd spent many years talking about how she could improve the physical health of the people she was working with. And if you look at the diagram on this slide, you can see that people with SMI are at increased risk of physical health problems, so much greater risk than the general population. And it's largely these physical health problems that are explaining their increased rates and early mortality in this population. And you can see the estimated number of deaths annually in Ireland, which are largely explained by physical health problems. And because there's an increased recognition, much more is being done now to really try and improve the physical health of this population. Part of the challenge is that their mental health symptoms, their medication, which increases their obesity levels and metabolic syndrome, and then also their lifestyle behaviours, which include both smoking and physical activity levels. So you've already heard about the guidelines and about physical activity levels. People with SMI are even less active than the general population. And in addition, they're much more sedentary. So some individuals are very sedentary, so up to 11 hours per day. And we know that's an independent risk factor for poor health. So what do we know then about physical activity? Well, obviously we heard Ryan talk about that there are lots of different approaches that can be used, but I think we know that if we are integrating physical activity into people's daily lives, they're much more likely to be able to maintain it, and that for the most inactive people, walking and using pedometers is a very good place to start. Now, what the guidelines for management of people with SMI are currently supporting is structured exercise programs, and that's where most of the evidence sits. There's very, very little evidence that walking or general behaviour change interventions are effective in this population to encourage them to be more active and less sedentary. And that's, I guess, despite the fact that the Lancet Psychiatry Commission in their publication around how we protect the health of people with SMI are clearly stating that we need interventions which have behaviour change or motivational and adherence strategies within them. So I'm going to move on to then just a little overview about our WORTH study. So this is a feasibility study. As I say, we're just at the final stages of this study, and the aim was to test the feasibility of a behaviour change intervention aimed at increasing physical activity and reducing sedentary behaviour in people with SMI. And we're assessing the sort of typical feasibility outcomes. So could we recruit and retain people? What was their adherence and engagement levels? We wanted to look at whether the intervention was acceptable, and then we will explore change in clinical markers once all of our data is in and complete a process evaluation. This is just a flow of our study, and you can see that we've recruited from border counties in Ireland and then 2 healthcare trusts in Northern Ireland. And our aim was deliberately to recruit more people in our intervention group, so 2-to-1 randomization. So we're expecting roughly 40, or at least our plan was 40 in our intervention and then 20 in our control. I have to say COVID kind of got in the way of all of that. And the intervention lasts for 13 weeks, and it's delivered by trained members of the community mental health team, so either occupational therapists or physiotherapists who did training with us and then delivered the intervention. And we're measuring outcome at baseline and then end of the intervention at 14 weeks. So this just shows you the intervention components. And has been informed by work, for example, the SITLESS study that Mark talked about and other studies that Mark and I have done together. But there were 4 main components to the intervention, very much with a focus around encouraging people to move more and sit less. We did have a weekly group walk in our plans for the intervention, but then COVID hit. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to include the group walk, and that then might be reflected in some of the feedback, qualitative feedback that we've got from the participants. And just maybe to point out as well, each participant received 6 coaching visits, and that was from the physiotherapist or the occupational therapist, and that was every fortnight over the 13 weeks of the intervention. So the intervention itself, we used the behaviour change wheel, so Susan Mickey's behaviour change wheel, and we very much had we used a wearable step counter, so the Mi Band, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's kind of a cheaper version of a Fitbit, and that really was, as I say, the centre part of our intervention. And then we have obviously use the behaviour change taxonomy to define the different components of the taxonomy. And that's published in our protocol again, if people want to read more detail about that, or I can answer questions at the end. So in terms of our trial outcome, we are measuring a whole range of outcomes. And as I said, we are just in the final stages of data collection, and we should have everything complete by the end of December. And so really what I want to share with you in the next couple of slides is really around adherence and engagement with the intervention. And that information came either from the clinicians' notes that they took in interacting with the participants, from a detailed log that the trial manager, Dr. Sarah Howes, took as she was working with the participants, and then qualitative interviews that were carried out by an independent member of our research team. So what we also did in this study is we had the opportunity for iteration. So after every wave of recruitment, we took stock of our results and then were able to optimize the intervention or make any changes that we felt were needed. And one thing that we were particularly focused on was recording in detail any challenges with engagement or support required from the participants. And this first wave of recruitment, we recruited 9 individuals who were in a residential supported living centre, and they needed a lot of day-to-day support. And we wanted to record, how long it took them to carry out the different aspects of the intervention and how much support they needed from Sarah. And alongside that, we also had the qualitative interviews, and these two pieces of information were then used to inform discussion with our trial management group, and then any changes or tweaks that were needed to the study moving forward before the next stage of recruitment. And what this has allowed us to do is to make sure that we were able to address any challenges as they became apparent, and that at this stage we have developed a trial manual and training that can be used in a definitive trial moving forward. So then just to talk to you a little bit about the results. So with the first 9 people that we recruited, we identified there were challenges not only with data collection, both quantitative and qualitative, but also with intervention delivery. And the individuals had real challenges completing, they were asked to complete a diary every night and put their steps into the diary, taken from the wearable device. They were offered the use of the device, but also an app to go along with that, and there were real challenges with that. And then finally, they had challenges just with even scheduling. So in terms of, we used an action coping plan to help them to actually plan their walks and to identify barriers in advance. And there were challenges with that component as well. So keeping that in mind, we decided that we would introduce a cognitive screening tool, and we used the MOCA. And we did have to change to the blind MOCA because of COVID, because we had to deliver this remotely. And the value of having this MOCA score in advance is that we have then been able to look at whether that's influencing engagement with the intervention. So where are we at the moment? Our results are that we've managed to recruit 54 people into our study. We had planned to recruit 60, but as I say, COVID got in the way, and the study was suspended for a year during COVID. And our trial manager, Sarah, has done a stellar job recruiting all of our participants into the study. And we've ended up with 34 in our intervention and 20 in our control group. Here is the demographics of our participants. So fairly even spread of males and females, just over 50 years of age, with a range of mental health diagnosis, and 20% living in supported living. And of those that we measured cognitive ability, you can see that 58% of them had cognitive impairment. Now, in terms of their actual adherence with the intervention, we showed really good adherence with the main features of the intervention. So most people attended nearly all of the coaching sessions. They used the MyBand or the Me Band, and there was really high adherence with the diary, particularly when we had to move to remote delivery. There was actually 100% adherence. Where there was much less adherence was actually with the use of the app. And this was, apologies, these keep moving forward automatically. And the people who used the app tended to be the people who had previous experience of using smartphones. Now, we did try various different approaches with people who weren't used to using a smartphone, but I would say by and large, they were not successful with the population that we were working with. So just then, in terms then of the qualitative feedback, so we interviewed individual interviews with 20 of the people who experienced the intervention. So that's 20 of the 34. And two main things emerged from those qualitative interviews. One, the actual value of the wearable. So many of this population had not used a wearable before, and they found it really highly motivating, both in terms of being able to see their physical activity, but also helping them to actually set step goals and know that they were actually achieving them. Being able to see their pattern of behavior also helped them in a process where we got them to go through an action coping plan. And this was really thinking about when they would walk, where they would walk, and really trying to set up those habits that have been discussed by the other speakers, but also to problem solve where they could see potentially that they might fail and not be able to maintain their activity or meet their step goals. The other important element was the coach, and they really talked about the coach being important, both for accountability, but also to support them then in aspects of the intervention delivery. And what came through really strongly was really what Ryan was saying about the emotional emotional response to this intervention. So for them, it wasn't really about healthier or getting healthier. That wasn't something that came through very strongly, but it was around their enjoyment with this. For some people, it was about actually physically getting out of the house. And for others, it was really about, for the first time, feeling independent and feeling confident about independent was really what they could see as the value of participating in this intervention. So here's just some of the quotes from the participants where they've talked about using the wearable. So it really helped them to see, have a more objective kind of view in my behavior and shine a light on my behavior. And I think this speaks to some degree to sort of this intention behavior gap. So people have this intention to be active, but they don't actually have any visualization of what their behavior patterns are like, and then how they might be able to change them. So this really helped people. Some people were really motivated about actually increasing their steps. So they'd never thought of steps for exercise, but they were really motivated having it on their arm. And then for others, it was a bit of a mixed bag. So sometimes they found it really good, and then other times it wasn't so good when they weren't making their step counts. The diary was a really important part of our intervention. So you can see here again some positive quotes about using the diary. And this was really important because you know, quite a high percentage of people in our study weren't actually able to use the app in order to record their steps through the app, and so they had to write them down. And for some people, they used both, but then found actually they were happy then to just continue using the app. And then the final element really that came through was about the coach. And for some people, the coach was really challenging them in terms of their activity levels. And for others, there was an element of not wanting to let the coach down, but also about not wanting to let themselves down. So really that they were seeing the value for themselves in meeting their step goals and being more active. So then just to finish then in terms of take-home message, we know that people with mental health problems can often have cognitive function problems. And this may influence their ability to engage with behavior or elements of behavior change intervention. So they obviously have problems with memory functioning, their executive function, which is really around goal-directed movements, and planning, problem solving, and also attention. And I think this is something, listening to what Ryan was talking about, that we'll go back and think about a little bit more carefully, because certainly what seems to be driving people actually is the emotional response and the fact that they're enjoying the intervention, but that these elements are really helping them maybe to set up the habit and get started. And just to finish off then, there is an increased interest in wearables, I think, in general for health conditions, and particularly for people with severe mental illness. But often these studies are actually excluding people with cognitive impairment. And what our study has shown is that people with SMI can engage in these interventions, and they really valued the watch and the coach. We've also shown that we could deliver the intervention both in person and then remotely because of COVID. But I do think it did require careful modification, and because of the way we were able to iterate our intervention, we were able to address challenges with intervention components as we moved forward. And we're looking forward to being able to analyse the process measures once all the data is in. And for a subset of these people, we are looking at their longer term engagement with the Mi Band or the wearable, to see did they continue to use it at 6 months, and whether that has any association with cognitive and other factors. And I'd just like to finish my talk then by thanking all of the participants with SMI, all of the clinicians who attended our training and delivered the intervention, and then all of the co-investigators, in particular Dr. Sarah Howes, who was the trial manager in the study, and as I said, did a stellar job in recruiting all of the individuals. And obviously just finish off by thanking the funders for this study, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any in due course. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's a brilliant presentation again. It shows the role of emotion in the decisions we make around physical activities. Thank you. Suzanne, there are questions in the Q&A that you'll be able to answer directly. Can I encourage people to submit their questions again into the Q&A, and then we can put them to the panel. Now, I'm going to share my screen. I'm delighted to launch this very exciting new physical activity learning pathway, Getting Active for Better Aging, which is now available on the IPH Public Matters platform. I'm going to briefly talk you through how we actually got to having a pathway, then explain how to access the pathway, and then finally cover what's actually in the pathway. So the learning pathway was developed from an evidence gathered from the Gallup program, the Generating Active Lives in Older People. This study involved 4 phases: a systematic review of the evidence, a review of the current policy and guidelines, a cross-sectional survey of healthcare practitioners in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and interviews with healthcare professionals who work with older adults. In summary, the systematic review concluded that physically active older adults experience healthier aging, better quality of life, improved cognitive function, and are at a lower risk of developing illness. The policy review found that physical inactivity is one of the most important public health challenges facing older adults on the island of Ireland today. The quantitative study discovered that awareness of the national physical activity guidelines varied among healthcare professionals, and the promotion of physical activity to older adults was not routine in practice. And finally, the qualitative study outlined that healthcare professionals identified the need for focused education, appropriate training, and access to tailored resources. And they felt this was essential to support the promotion of physical activity in routine practice with older adults. In light of the findings of the Gallup Research Project, we developed an online learning pathway and training activities for healthcare professionals that aim to enhance the knowledge of the benefits of physical activity among healthcare professionals and increase the ability of healthcare professionals to promote physical activity to their patients, and particularly older adults. By the end of the pathway, you should have achieved these learning outcomes: a greater awareness and understanding of the benefits of physical activity and the risks of physical inactivity, increased skills and knowledge of how to promote and support the appropriate physical activity for your patients, and knowledge of where to find further information and resources on physical activity. So let me talk you through how you actually get access to this new pathway. The new Public Health Matters platform and the app serve as a communication tool and a digital learning resource, enabling IPH to develop and deliver short learning courses on issues, also keeping subscribers up to date with the work of IPH and key public health developments. You can access the Public Health Matters on the desktop platform at learning.publichealth.ie, or you can download it from the Public Health Matters app, which is free on Google Play or the iTunes Store, according to what type of phone you're actually using. The important thing to know is these courses are free and anyone can register for an account. So you can see when you go into the store what you'll find. So on entering the Public Health Matters platform, you will see the range of courses available and enroll for a particular pathway. When you following the pathway, activities are unlocked as you complete them, and that's important. So it's just not one long pathway. There's different activities that you can actually do along the route. The activities provide short, interactive, self-paced learning activities, and you can follow the pathway at your own time frame, dipping in and out when you have time and when suits you. So just like we did today, there's short quizzes to allow you to verify your learning and your knowledge. So we covered the issue about the number of minutes. But again, we have also more detailed real life case scenarios. So for example, you'll be given a case history, you'll be given some background, and you'll be asked, is a physical activity intervention appropriate for this person? Then you'll be given a choice to answer yes, no, don't know, need further investigation, and then you'll be given the correct answer. These clinical case studies have been developed working with the professions in those particular areas. users are awarded a certificate of completion after finishing the pathway. So it's a really interactive and useful resource. I wish it was here whenever I was starting out on this journey on learning about physical activity. But you know, it's excellent to be at this point today, but it's important to remember many people have been involved in actually getting us here. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has helped us. We'd like to thank the Generating Active Lives in Older People Implementation Advisory Group, Vanda Cummins, Deirdre Lang, Chris Liggett, John Brennan, Andrew O'Regan, Alison Porter Armstrong, Brenda Rush, and Tom Sullivan. You know, they were so important over the last year where we met regularly. They gave us feedback on what we were doing. They pointed us in the right direction and helped us adjust the content of this. We'd also like to thank the PHA and the HSC Trust Physical Activity Forum for their feedback and helpful contribution, and particularly Colette Brawley and Jared Walls for hosting this meeting. That was really, really helpful. We'd also like to express our thanks to the HSC, in particular Sarah O'Brien, for hosting a meeting with colleagues where we received really useful feedback about the content as well. When you develop a content like this, it's usually in a document or a PowerPoint, and then it has to look more magical. So I want to thank Orion Learning for their work with us on the project and developing it into an online resource. But finally, I'd like to thank the communications team at the Institute of Public Health who have worked very intensively over the last number of weeks in creating this online resource and all the things that go behind the pathway. So thank you again. And two other people, Toby Finch has worked on this for the last year. So thank you. And Connor Cunningham, who previously worked on this on the Gallup program for 3 years. Thank you both for your work on this. So finally, please check out the learning resource. Feedback is welcome. We'll be continually adding aspects and activities to this learning resource. And with your help and feedback, it will improve and get better. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to move into the discussion panel. If anybody wants to submit a question now, that would be great. This is to the panel. This is about what we've heard this morning from the different speakers, what it means in practice. How do we really encourage and support older adults to be physically active? So let me just start off to the panel. Is there anything that stands out for you in any of the three presentations? Anything that rings home for you or challenges you? I think seminars are really important in that they should do three things. So confirm things you already know. Tell you things that you don't know. And thirdly, challenge you in some of the things that you think you already know. Okay, so anybody want to make a comment on what you've heard from Ryan, Mark, or Suzanne this morning? Anything that rings true for you?
Sure,
Deirdre. Yes, thank you.
So I just found all of the conversations just really enlightening, and I have learned loads. So thank you to everybody for your research. The couple of things that stood out to me as people were talking, and they didn't name these, were ageism and our own ageism against ourselves, and that we stop feeling we can participate and continue and be part of clubs and groups that exercise because we've come to a certain age. And also something that is my lived experience at the moment, and I do tend to overshare, but the menopause. And we don't ever look at that for women and why they stop exercising. And so I'd love to see us looking at elements of that for older people in relationship to the psychology of exercising when you don't feel your best, when you think, oh, you know what, I'm at the end of it, so I may as well just give up and sit back down. And sure, and then that's then perpetuated by families who say, no, Mommy, you don't be going out and helping Mary because Mary's, you know, she's able to look after herself, and you're getting that little bit old. So that in the narrative that we heard, I could just hear that coming from myself, that whole narrative of that, and the whole sense that as healthcare professionals, we have a duty to socially prescribe on each one of our contacts, every touch point. And if I think about nursing, which I represent, there's 70,000 nurses registered in Ireland. That's 70,000 people who have the opportunity on each occasion they meet an older adult to talk about exercise and its benefits. So there's loads. I'll shut up and let others talk now.
So, look, thanks, Deirdre. And that ageism part is so interesting. The ageism you experience and the ageism you have of yourself. So, anybody else? Vanda, what rung through for you in those 3 presentations this morning?
Yeah, just even to follow up on Deirdre's point, I think throughout life we all face certain, challenges and things, and it is that thing about the menopause is often a time for change, and that change can have negative things if you're feeling stiff, if you're feeling sore, if your joints are inflamed, and sometimes it's hard to know what to do and how to bounce back from that. And sometimes people think, oh my goodness, I'm getting old now. And another flashpoint is often retirement. So when you retire, your life changes, and again, physical activity levels can change. And also illness. So there's times in our lives when pregnancy is another one, but where suddenly you've got this routine going and it's affected and it changes. And I think it's really important that we recognize that and we're able to have strategies that we can actually deal with that. And it may be we have to modify exercise, we may have to change things, but we need to address that and discuss it. And I think for me, I work with older people and day to day, and I see barriers all the time. And we've got to discuss those and look at them. And, one thing that I know it was talked about today was the environment. And that's a big thing for older people, and getting out and about and uneven pathways, problems, they just feel a bit unsteady. But one simple thing is even toilets, public toilets when you're out. And, we've got to look at simple things like that. Like during COVID, it was a nightmare. Nothing was open. So, we've really got to, all of us, and everyone has a role here, not just health professionals, all of us can help each other and support each other. And, there's something for everybody. And no matter what your level of ability, no matter where you're at in your life, and we need to work from that baseline, and all those strategies need to help. So very positive messages from today. There is something for everybody, is what I'd say.
Thanks, Vanda. Thank you very much. There's so much you touch on. We'll cover on. We'll cover on that further. Niall, just a reflection. Any thoughts on what you've heard on the 3 presentations today, or what Deirdre or Vanda has touched on?
Yeah, there was, I think, really valuable information shared today. And, I've taken photos and made notes and done all sorts of stuff. So, certainly lots for me to consider. I think a key thing for me, though, is as an occupational therapist, one of the key things that I try and do is help people to get more active in that whole integration with daily life aspect of things. I'm not sure whether or not a lot of people would set themselves an exercise goal, but we can certainly then work towards doing that, as you were talking about earlier on, Roger, the sort of the just move more sort of goal. And that can be just how we can integrate that into our daily lives, that just sort of movement, day to day. And it could be out in the community by using the car a little bit, less, and walking more. It can be engaging in sort of activities that people enjoy, like gardening or DIY. Like there's so many ways that we can sort of move a little bit more without necessarily framing it as exercise. And for me, that was one of the sort of the key messages. And walking is a really sort of good example of that, isn't it? If people walked a little bit more, either, for day-to-day activities, errands they need to run, or with friends and family, it would make a massive difference to people's lives. And the other thing is, I think it's great that it'd be, great for the environment. And sometimes when we actually frame things around not necessarily only just the benefit from a health perspective, but how it's going to actually be beneficial in lots of other different ways. sometimes people buy in a little bit more, because I think people sometimes find it difficult to identify as being someone who exercises, you know, but somebody who moves more, I think we can all identify with. So that was sort of one of the key messages that I took away from it.
Thanks, Niall. That's great. And actually, I'd like to go back to that. And Deirdre, I think you shared in the past an example of an older person and watching television and the activities they did around watching television. Thomas, do you have any reflection on what you heard this morning in the 3 presentations?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just some fantastic presentations this morning. I was just thinking around Ryan's presentation at the start and the importance of habit building. And it just got me thinking about a few years ago, we work with 150 nursing homes and daycare centres around Ireland. And I was speaking with a director of nursing in a convent in Dublin, and I just went in to meet with her about see how the program was going. And she said that the class was every Wednesday at 4 o'clock. And I asked her how the session was going, and she said, well, look, previously we tried to run activities for the nuns, and if it didn't involve drinking tea or praying, they weren't interested. But your trainer Andrew comes in at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday, and they're sitting waiting from 1 o'clock for the session. And the reason for that was, you know, it was fun, it was enjoyable. The nuns in particular really enjoyed the boxing element of it. So, you know, we won't go too far down the road on that one. But and then going back to Mark's talk about and the importance of previous history of physical activity and the negative aspects of that. And one again got me thinking of, you know, a nursing home resident we worked with a few years ago. He was 104 years of age, and we found out a little bit about him, what he liked, and he used to play soccer. So our trainer used to bring in a football to that gentleman, and to be doing little passes over and back. He was in the chair, not very mobile, of course, but we implemented the soccer ball into the exercise class with him. So that, and you know, it made it enjoyable for him. And again, he was, you know, looking forward to that exercise program. And then the other side as well is that, you know, particularly in community-based programs for us, is the important to measure what you're doing. So get your baseline measurements, be it for the work we do with patient groups, and that improves the buy-in and give feedback back to the participants in the program first, you know, on their improvements or areas that they are improving on. I think that's very, very important, just to, you know, to improve that level of engagement and the social aspect as well. If it come back to habit building, if you that cup of tea and slice of cake after the community-based session, it's hugely important as well.
Thanks, Thomas. That's great, actually. So there's something coming through about making it fun, enjoyable. Niall talking about the framing of exercise and activity. Deirdre had mentioned, because I'm interested about how you encourage people to become more physically active. And I think the story you told was about someone watching television a lot and then getting up in between commercials as an activity. Do you want to just recap on that?
Yeah, so it was we had set up a Get Up, Get Dressed, Get Moving campaign, and one of the nurses involved had decided that she was actually going to use Thomas's work, and had been doing some research as part of a study she was doing. Her father was one of those people who he loved to sit on the couch, and his wife was getting frustrated with him because the longer he was sitting on the couch, the bigger his belly was getting, and the more he was snorting to try and get up, and he was on this and sitting down and going out to the coffee shop. It was all very moaning around the table when he sat down in the coffee shop, and she was getting embarrassed and cross with him. So his daughter put it to him, and she said, okay, we're going to do those chair-based exercises. Just sit to stands. She took a photograph of him beforehand, and she gave him, I think it was a 6-week program where every day, twice a day, they just did sit to stand exercises. And she'd shown them the videos that CL Blue had done and things like that. And she took a photograph of him beforehand, and she took a photograph of him 6 weeks later, and she used this as a case study for her master's program she was doing. And the difference in the gentleman from being not able to get up off his couch to being able to get up from a normal kitchen chair with no arms on it, just stood up as we were doing when we were doing the exercises with Thomas. And his quality of life had improved dramatically, and he'd lost weight. His whole posture in the photographs was completely changed because his confidence had improved, his sense of self had improved, his sense of giving up, oh sure, I'm too old for all of this, just by those sit to stand exercises, which is very simple. So the wife was able to bring him back out to the coffee shop again and not be embarrassed by him, which was lovely.
Thank you, thank you, Deirdre. I want to ask Vanda. Vanda, what's the first thing you do in your role when you're trying to encourage a behavior change in an older person to get more physically active? What's the first thing you do?
Yeah, so I see people in their homes. I'm very privileged. I'm able to go in and see them in their own environments. But the first thing I'll always do is try and establish their baseline. What are they currently doing? What how much activity are they doing? Are they moving around a little bit? Are they just moving to do day-to-day stuff? As Niall was saying, we're all in the business of moving. We have to move to live and do things. And then there's another level to that where we're actually involved in physical activity. And are we doing that for health? That's where the walks come in. And that's where the little bit of extra physical activity comes in for good health, whether it's for social or just your own personal good health. And then there's a level where people are exercising, excuse me, sorry. Where people are exercising, and that's where it's specific. We're targeting certain muscles or joints or areas of the body. We're giving them a certain dosage of exercise for an amount of duration, and we want to change something. So I see in the chat box, Professor Peter Gore is on, and he was asking that question: how do we explain the difference between movement, physical activity, and exercise? And I think we need to really understand that there is a difference between them. We need them all. But yet, depending on the person in front of us and their belief system, we may need to modify how we explain something to somebody. Because as somebody said, exercise can be off-putting. People think of exercise as going to the gym. No, that's not just what exercise is about. But some people have that belief. It's a part of it. So the language we use, how we explain things is very, very important. So we need to be clear ourselves as well what we're offering somebody. So we get their baseline. We see how that fits compared to what we were talking about with the minimum recommended guidelines for good health. Then we talk about their belief systems, how if they've tried to change things before, were they successful, were they not, where they're at, what they think they might do. Can we make it a win-win situation for them? And then we set little goals for them. So whether it's around posture and, restorative, feeling good exercise, flexibility, strength, balance, whatever component we're looking to do, that's what we'll set. But it will be very much based on where they're at and what they would like to do. So I hope that kind of helps.
Oh no, thank you. And again, for people who want to look in the learning pathway, we looked at the whole issue around the difference between activity, exercise, inactivity, sedentary behavior. So we go in and give examples, and we actually try to encourage people to consider their understanding of these different terms. Okay, so Niall, in your role, and I know you have many roles inside work and outside of work. How do you encourage people to a behavior change around getting more active? And I do like the idea of you're talking about the whole reframing. What do you do?
I suppose what I was thinking about this, and you sort of I nearly do things on automatic pilot now, but when I actually break it down, what I usually start with is really just taking a holistic approach. I think, Roger, is sort of an important bit, and just trying to find out a little bit about just the person, what motivates them, what are their interests, a bit like what Vanda said, what are they currently engaged in, and then we would typically use an instrument called an interest checklist, and that actually identifies what people are currently engaged in, what they previously engaged in, and what they would like to engage in the future across a whole range of activities, both some of which would be considered, exercise and vigorous exercise, some which would be considered creative, others would be productive, or there would be educational, lots of different areas. And what we often try and identify is hone in on the areas that people would like to engage in more, maybe that they've stopped engaging in. And a bit like what Deirdre said, and I think this is really important, sometimes people, for a variety of different reasons, have stopped engaging in some activities that are really meaningful for them and they really, really identify with. And they've started to maybe have a narrative in their own head that they can't engage in them anymore. They've nothing to contribute anymore. Like if you're not playing, you know, senior hurling, or, you know, if you're not playing, you know, FAI soccer, you know, you're actually really don't have anything to contribute. And of course, you've loads to contribute. And by considering the re-engagement with that, like Thomas's example is absolutely spot on. A football, kicking a ball back and forward, somebody who previously loved soccer, that's a fantastic engagement in exercise, but in a way that's meaningful to the person. So exercise for exercise sake is something that I don't know how maintainable it really is, unless you have somebody like Thomas or a coach or a peer who's constantly doing it with you, or in Deirdre's example, the daughter who was a nurse. So for me, it's to try and find the activities that the person feels compelled to engage in. You know, that if we start them on a particular track, they get such internal motivation from engaging with it that they keep going themselves. We just need to be the catalyst for that. And what I would do for that is really try to find that activity that the person either previously engaged in or is currently engaged in, and trying to sort of either up the amount of engagement in that or a re-engagement with it. And I work with people with mental health difficulties an awful lot. So it's really encouraging to see, you know, the people with mental health difficulties being considered. And often motivation is a real barrier for people with mental health difficulties. So, you know, one of the real ways of getting around that motivational barrier is actually that there's a core internal interest in the activity that maybe the person previously had, you know, or they've always wanted to do. So, I mean, that's a key element, a key step that I would sort of take. The other thing, I suppose, without wanting to talk too long, is that I don't rush it. And I think this is a really important thing. I think sometimes we're so keen for people to get going that actually we sort of rush it, and then the person backs off because the change is not at their pace. It's too quick. We're sort of, you know, we're moving at our pace rather than at their pace. And I think it's really important that we, you know, that we don't rush it, and we work at the person's pace rather than at what we would love to achieve or what our pace currently is. We're not in their shoes. We can't make the change for them. So it has to be at their pace.
Thanks, Niall. That's great. And actually that fits into one of the comments that's come into the Q&A from Paul at Age and Opportunity about the, you know, there's not one size fits all, that actually we have to understand what makes different people tick, what's seen as enjoyable, what's the history of that person with regard to physical activity or exercise. Thomas, in your role, you meet a range of different people who want to take part in your programs. What are the types of challenges that the older people you meet face in getting physically active, and what type of workarounds have you got? You talked about the football. What other ones? Because it's really important that we're able to share this here with the other people. Common challenges and workarounds on that.
I suppose in terms of challenges, you have the environmental challenges. I think Van spoke about at the start would be, you know, say our community-based programs, are they in a good location? Is there a bus stop nearby? Is there access to transport, toilets, good lighting, all those pieces? And then on a more going into more detail, we try and make sure in all cases that it's the one trainer delivering the program on a weekly basis. So it gives the trainer an opportunity to get to know the participant, and more importantly, gives the participant an opportunity to get to know our trainer, build up a relationship over time. So you're getting to see those improvements, those small improvements over time that Niall mentioned. Yeah, that that would be the key way to overcome them challenges.
Okay.
So one
Thanks,
of the challenges that we could face as well is that, you know, in certain cases people think, oh, I'm too old to exercise. You know, and we'd always we always ask, what age are you? And so generally people are maybe in their early 80s, and we always use the opportunity, the example of the few people who are the few centurions that we work with. I would mention I am trying to get my 97-year-old grandmother to join our classes, but her response is that she will start joining our classes when she gets old.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
they would be
probably keep busy.
some of the challenges that we are faced with. One is just make sure to build up that familiarity, and make sure the sessions are, you know, that there's a fun element. It's social as well, you know, and people, you know, they can see the improvements. Make sure that you know, we're not looking for, you know, quick wins, and then also that, you know, the people are setting meaningful targets. One of the most powerful ones I heard had been with some of the work we're doing with the Irish Men's Sheds. You know, we're getting anecdotal stories back that, you know, some of the men participating in our programs are able to play soccer with their grandkids again. You know, huge for them.
Okay.
So that would be some of the challenges that we're faced with, and then you're trying to, you know, make sure that people can participate in programs that, you know, are fun, enjoyable, and make meaningful change in their lives.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Deirdre, and we touched on this at the start, and you touched on ageism as well. The issue that Ryan touched on, the importance of enjoyment in physical activity, and, you know, given the program that you had ran, how can we make physical activity and exercise more fun and more normal and more enjoyable, and less, like Niall touched on, unless you're playing hurling at a certain level, you know, it's not important. So how do we get the just enjoyable?
Yeah, I was looking at that slide about the unsuccessful transitioners, and those people, older people who post-COVID have just, you know, become reclusive and have stopped. People who were those people who went out for the walk with their pal and, you know, were down the shops and having the coffee. It's the purpose of having to do it, isn't it? It's not as Niall said, it's not exercise for exercise sake. It's the sense of using activity or movement to achieve something. So it's not always about playing the football game or running the marathon. And another lovely piece I use all the time is an ad that was a German ad a few Christmases ago, where there was an older man and he wanted to be able to achieve a goal. And so he went out to his shed and he lifted a kettlebell every day, and he tried to get it over his head. And the first time he couldn't lift it up to his knees. And every day he was just going out with a purpose. He had an intention and he had a goal, and he wanted to achieve something really special. And you watch then as the neighbors are watching him going, he's lost the plot altogether. And then you see him getting that bit stronger. And then it's Christmas Day and you see him going to his daughter's house and picking his grandchild up and lifting her up to put the angel on the tree. And so that was a sense of purpose for him. But the other part of it is that whole social thing, isn't it? It's the whole fun of doing things together, and we're social animals, human beings. And so we like to do things with people, and that brings either a bit of competition into it, or as Thomas said, about the bit of cake afterwards, because you've got, you know, you're rewarding yourself with something. So it's that sense of community, that sense of purpose, and that sense of having fun, that it's not about having to be the best at something. It's about beating yourself yesterday, you know. And I always talk about my future older self. What makes me get up on the wet day is my future older self wants to be 97, still doing what Thomas says. I'll do that when I'm older. And so it's an accumulation of that, isn't it? It's a sense of a vision, a sense of a purpose, a sense of fun, and a sense of community.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Deirdre. That's really important. So when we're both 97, we will be out doing some form of activity or exercise. Vanda, a few weeks ago, you ran a physical activity assessment in North Dublin. I came along to it, and I thought it was fantastic, where you had number of different activities, and people actually came along and did an assessment of, in terms of their level of fitness. I found it very insightful. I would encourage people do that. Vanda, in terms of encouraging people to assess their level of fitness or to maintain their level of fitness, have you any advice or suggestions for people?
Yeah, so what we did in that event, which was during Positive Aging Week, was we
Oh, we just lost Vanda. Hopefully she'll come back now in a second. If not, okay. So
helped people to see sorry, can you hear me now?
you're back again. Okay. So you were just
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, signal is not here. But yes, we were trying to help people to again self-test themselves, honor themselves, so that they compare them to their people of their age, where they or they need to improve. So that's where we're at. And then we had conversations with them about what they're currently doing and how we might be able to, I suppose, things that might make really maximize their abilities. So it wasn't just the testing, the conversation afterwards of that testing. They were given it all in form so they could take it home with them.
Okay, Vanda,
So
apologies, your line's going down, but maybe if you turn off your camera, you might actually it may actually work. I'll come back to you that, but
can you hear me now?
I can hear you. We can hear you perfectly now. So
okay.
If you want to try that again. So in terms of,
you'd asked me what we did about the functional fitness testing that we offered people, and it was basically like a checkup, and we just encouraged people to see what they were able to do, if there was any, compared to people of their own age, were they good for their age? Did they need to maybe do a little bit more? And then we had a chat with them about what they were currently doing, and just maybe there was a few little things they could do extra to really opportunities that they would maximize their ability.
Okay, thanks, Vanda. Vanda, there's a question in the Q&A about how people who have had their physical activity disrupted, say after an operation or a procedure, how can they get back into their routine? Do you have any suggestions on that, Vanda?
Yeah, like it can be difficult, and particularly if they haven't been well educated, their baseline is much lower. We would always encourage them to start from where they're at. Try not to have, some people say, well, I can't do what I used to do, therefore there's nothing I can do. So we just take them back and we put a bit of plan, things like where they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, who they're going to do it, how often they're going to do it. If they have another challenge with it, how are they going to get over that? So really putting a plan in place and writing down a plan and supporting them through the difficult bits. And we have to grade exercise and movement and physical activity. We need to just make sure that whatever we do, we're able for, and build slowly. So little and often. We may need to give them advice about pacing so they don't overdo it. But equally, you don't underdo it. Sometimes we underdo things. And I think we'd often ask a question about huff and puff, and when was the last time they felt they needed.
That's brilliant, Vanda. Thank you. We've just lost Vanda again. Niall, so this is really
take
about
extra breaths, because I understand that. Oh dear, sorry.
Okay, no problem, Vanda. Thank you. We'll just I thought we'd lost you again. Niall, what's your insight or tip for starting a physical activity behavior change conversation with a patient, an older person, a friend, a colleague? What tip do you have? Because we've like 3 minutes here, so I'm going to go around and ask what's the one tip that they would give to people listening today about how to start that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I wouldn't tend to just launch into it is the honest answer, and what I would, I suppose, do is just try and determine in a very sort of casual way what they're currently doing on a day-to-day basis, And B, are they aware of opportunities for engagement in their local community? Like I saw it mentioned on a couple of the different slides, but I think it's a really important thing that location plays a big role in terms of people's engagement. If it's easy for the person to get to it, if there's a local park, if there's a local GAA club, if there's a local swimming pool, if there's a local library, if there's a local active retirements group, these are all the facilitators to engagement. The big issue I would have with a number of those organizations, probably except the GAA, would be that they often don't advertise themselves well enough. And I think that there's an awful lot of activities going on in the parish hall, in the library, in all sorts of places that people aren't really aware of. Like Thomas's very, movement break with us earlier on was brilliant. That's probably going on in lots of places around the country, either by Thomas's group or other groups. But often people aren't there. So they're in their own homes, wanting to get involved in something, but not knowing what's available. And for me, sometimes I ask the question, do you know what's going on in your local area? And often there's very limited knowledge. And sometimes my role would be, and the role I would do with either a friend or a colleague or a patient, is sort of saying, oh, do you know there's such and such is there? Or do you know, actually, this is going on around the corner? Or do you know they do this every, Tuesday morning, in the local parish centre? And, then sometimes it's just then linking up, people with, the different opportunities that are there. Once they have the information, then often they get on their bike and start doing it. But I suppose I wouldn't launch into it, particularly if I feel that it's not going to be well received.
Thank you, Niall.
Put it that way.
Thanks, Niall. That's good advice. Deirdre, it's really interesting, the figures that Ryan cited. A third of people who had an intention were unsuccessful, but actually 42% of those who had an intention were successful. So what's your top tip for starting a physical activity change conversation with an older person or a patient or a work colleague or a friend?
Well, I suppose, like Niall said, you have to be very cautious and careful and respectful of the people you're speaking with. So I think building trust and respect, but using the opportunity to talk about movement and how, is it difficult for you? What are the difficulties for you? Are you finding shopping difficult? Are you finding moving around your house difficult? And what would your goals be? And that there is support and help to achieve your goals, as small or as large as they may be. And it's about, so there's a lady has put into the chat about she was told she'd never move her arm up above her head again, but she was determined to post-surgery, and she set herself a goal every day. And it's not to be fatalistic. Do not be ageist to yourself. Do not allow the world to say to you that, no, this is an age you are now and that you will never achieve anymore. Be stubborn, be fierce, be ferocious, and be selfish, and be that tiger for yourself. Choose to be as fit as you possibly can be.
Deirdre, that's a good call to action. Thank you so much for that. Thomas, you're in a different role, but there's something about encouraging people to be physically active. What's your tip? Because people are listening here and everybody likes ideas that they can adjust to themselves. When you go into a room, how do you encourage? Everybody's there, but they mightn't be completely committed. What do you do?
I suppose make it a fun and fun yet challenging environment. We measure what's been done. I think on a personal level, Roger, I think it's very, very important to set goals. With goal setting? It's the whole saying is, don't think it, ink it. So if you have a calendar, write it down on your calendar that 10 o'clock my exercise class is on Monday. I'm going walking at 12 o'clock with such and such on Wednesday. And that doesn't matter if you're, I think that's important right across the board. In my own case, next week I'm going to run the Dublin Marathon. And I sat down in June and planned out my schedule, my 16-week schedule it goes into my work calendar. It's in my it's in the calendar at home. And I think I've only missed one session in the 16 weeks. But if I hadn't done that calendar, there wouldn't be a hope that I'd run, I'd be able to run the marathon. So, you know, and that transfers right across. Set yourself some goals, and write it down, and you know, get it into your calendar, because you know it makes yourself accountable to yourself as well, so that you know you're okay. You look at the calendar, be it on the fridge or in the kitchen or wherever it is. I haven't got out for my run. It makes it you're accountable to your family members as well. Okay, I need to go, and they're aware of it too. So I think that's very, very important, and the whole peer aspect of it as well. It doesn't matter if you're a 4-year-old setting out with your GAA club, or if you're like me trying to run a marathon, or if you're an older adult. You know, it needs to be fun and enjoyable with the group.
Okay, Thomas, I've got a new line. Don't think it, ink it. I love it. I haven't come across that, so thank you for that. Vanda, so what's your tip? You're the last on the panel to speak. What's your tip for older people and colleagues trying to encourage older people to get physically active?
Yeah, so I've just switched off my camera there. I hope you can hear me. And
Yeah.
I think my advice is don't complicate it. Start simple, start small. Think about what you're doing already. As Niall said, day-to-day activities. You know, is it a few? Well, and also you can incorporate it into any time of the day. But what is it you want? Do you want to get flexibility? Do you want to improve your posture? Do you want to boost your circulation? Do you want to get stronger? Do you want to get better balance? What is it that you want? And then crowbar a few little bits that will help you do that throughout the day. So in the morning, maybe before you get out of bed, or just when you've got out of bed, tag it on to something you do. Brushing your teeth, you know, making a cup of tea. You can crowbar in a few little extra movements during that time, and then it's a trigger, and you don't even think it becomes a habit, and you don't start, you know, you don't have to think about it. So it's building it out. I'll give you one last example. My own father, he's not into really doing exercises, but he's got a long corridor from his bedroom to the top of the stairs, and he's got a nice wall either side of it, and that's when he does his balance activities. And he will walk one foot in front of the other up and down that corridor. He has the walls in case he wobbles. He's also trying to improve his foot reactions. But that's a habit now. That's the time he does it. And then he's off doing things the rest of the day. But again, he's built that into his day. It's something he had to get down the corridor anyway. And he's just getting down the corridor in a different way where he can work on his balance. So he's made a functional activity into a balance exercise. So that's my advice. Keep it simple, build it into your day. Look around your house. What are you doing in your house already? And just, you know, crowbar in a few little extra things. So good luck, everybody. And it is definitely something everybody can do, no matter what your level of ability.
Thank you, Vanda. Thank you so much. Look, we've had a great webinar today. We've actually ran over a little bit because we had so much to cover. We had actually many more questions and areas to cover, but we're just run out of time. I want to thank the three speakers. I want to thank you, the panelists. I want to thank Leah and the communications team who have worked behind the scenes. Toby as well, who's been going through the questions. I'd like to thank you all for attending to the very end. Thank you so much. And just to remind you, if you want to access the Getting Active for Better Aging pathway, if you go on to the Public Health Matters, you can get it on your desktop or download the Public Health Matters app in the Google Play or the iTunes store. So please do that, check it out, see how it works. Feedback, very, very welcome. Thank you all for giving me your time today. I look forward to seeing you again next year. So take care. Bye-bye.